do I need a license?
So the getting into the specifics of the rule, which is in litigation. So first of
this
all,
ought to be a really simple question.
I understand.
Do you understand why the average citizen sitting out there saying, I've got 400 pages of rulemaking, might not understand what they are allowed to do under the law when the director of the ATF can't look at a member of Congress and tell me yes or no?
Congress provide, and we were seeing
and you
massive
can't even answer it. How can the average American know it?
That was Chip Roy of Texas questioning the ATF director. You might remember him from when he was showing off the ATF gun expert on CBS.
So, and Chris is here. He's one of our leading experts.
Well, let's see about that.
Where's the bump stock? Is there like a physical piece?
But that's a great question, right? Of course, right? How can you tell,
Yeah.
right? These two things are the same.
They look, right.
They operate the same. Both of them can shoot right through this 75-round clip.
That's what a bump stock looks like?
Correct. This is a bump stock. I'm trying to get it to lock back into the position. So
These are not loaded.
They're not loaded. We checked them all before
Yes,
we came
okay.
in. So this is the bump stock. The shooter would place his finger here on this piece here, and then it would rock back into the fire.
And you're doing it slow. What rate of speed are we talking about? If you know, hundreds and hundreds of rounds
400 to
a minute.
500 rounds per minute
Right.
is, I believe, what they're claiming for this particular firearm.
There is no reason you would use that for hunting.
No, I do not believe you would use this for hunting.
Called the Second Amendment.
So correct. So this is an NFA item. National Firearms Act item requires additional tax stamp for it, background check, waiting period,
Registration.
with the NFRTR, and then you have this, which is the GCA version of it, which you could walk into the store and purchase in that configuration.
Well, we didn't. People are claiming that they could do that, right? Our rule says that these two things are to be treated the same.
So that's the frame.
Chris is here. He's one of our leading experts.
I can't get this one apart.
So what Chip Roy is questioning the ATF director about is this new so-called rule that is actually a law. It's one of these instances where the ATF creates a regulation which should actually be legislation coming from Congress. However, even if Congress did pass legislation that was similar to this regulation, I would still consider it to be an infringement on the Second Amendment, which pretty much every single gun law is. But basically it's in regards to who has to register as a federal firearm dealer and who doesn't.
The Biden administration announcing new changes to gun rules this morning, which will soon affect thousands of private sellers of firearms.
The rule requires anyone who sells firearms predominantly to earn a profit to become federally licensed.
The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives will begin enforcing this change in 30 days.
Today, the Justice Department is issuing one of the most significant gun regulations in decades. Pursuant to the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the regulation expands the definition of who must obtain a license and conduct a background check before selling firearms.
As is par for the course for a federal bureaucrat, the director cannot answer a simple question about the regulation because they write the regulation in such a way that is to overcomplicate it. But regardless, until we get rid of the ATF as a whole, these things are not going to change. And here's the full interaction between Chip Roy and the ATF director.
I think as the director knows, I was a prosecutor under Project Safe Neighborhoods in the U.S. Attorney's Office, worked closely with ATF in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. I share your sentiment about the patriotic Americans serving in ATF trying to stop violent criminals from moving drugs and using firearms against the law. In ways that are undermining the safety and security of the American people. And I want to thank those men and women for what they do every day in that service. But would the director agree that there have been times where ATF have not gotten it right? I realize that with respect to the case we've already discussed with respect to Mr. Malinowski, that you're saying that's an investigation, but what about something like Fast and Furious?
So, of course, like any agency, there are times where we don't get things right and can improve.
So a couple of questions for you, along these lines. I think it's really important for the American people to understand. Do you, as the director of ATF, do you believe that the American people have a constitutional right, an individual right, to keep and bear arms?
The Supreme Court has made it clear, and yes, the Second Amendment has been interpreted numerous times by the Supreme Court, just as you. There's more to it, but yes, what you have said, yes.
Okay, and so but you believe that you interpret the Constitution that way.
I interpret all the laws the way that the Supreme Court says they're to be interpreted, and when the Supreme Court speaks on something,
would you have said that about Plessy?
Congressman, I work for a law enforcement agency. I'm not a judge,
but
I accept the rulings of the court, including that one. I'm not dodging your question.
Do you, as the director of ATF, believe there is an individual constitutional right to bear arms?
Yes, there is one. The Supreme Court has said it.
Along those lines, do you, as the director of ATF, believe that the federal government should maintain a registry or otherwise track, catalog, keep records of the transactions of firearms conducted by the American people, such that you would know what firearms I possess?
Congress has explicitly forbidden ATF from keeping a registry, and we do not. Again, we obey the law. We don't make the law, we obey it.
Do you, as the director, believe that the federal government should track ownership of firearms among the American people?
Congressman, we follow the law as you put it, as you pass it. You have said we cannot have a registry. We follow that provision and will continue to as long as it's the law.
As the director of ATF, do you have a position on that? Should we track ownership of firearms?
As director of ATF, my position is if it's in the law, we follow it.
If I want to sell a gun that I currently own to a friend in Texas, do I need a license?
So getting into the specifics of the rule, which is in litigation. So first of all,
this ought to be a really simple question.
I understand. So you look at the totality of the circumstances. If we're talking about an isolated sale from somebody who is not engaged in the business of dealing firearms, you don't need a license.
All right. So if I, a citizen, this country, I live in Texas, I have a weapon and I want to sell it to a fellow Texan, on an isolated basis, do I need a license?
Again, if you are not engaged in the business of selling firearms, those are Congress's words.
If I post a sale for a firearm last year, okay, and I do that on some relevant website like TexasGunTrader.com, and I sell that weapon, I sell it for $500, and then I inherit a gun from my dad or from my uncle, and I inherit it last month, and it's like 6 months later, and I sell it, for another profit. I sell it for $500. And then less than a year later, I have another weapon that I inherit or I've got, and I decide I don't need anymore, and I sell it. Is that engaging in the business? Is that engaging in activity that means I need a license?
I think pursuant to the clear language of Congress in doing this and to the things we've said in the rule, we specifically mentioned inheritance as one of the things that is not indicative of engaging in the business.
What if I have just 12, what if I have 12, 15, or 20 weapons and I sell 3 over the course of a year?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm just saying, if I have about 50, let's assume I had 15 or 20 weapons and I wanted to sell 3 over the course of a year.
I think
I'd like to make money on it.
My reaction to what you're saying is that you look at it's very clear that you look at the totality of the circumstances. We can go through an endless series of hypotheticals. Hypotheticals aren't the way we address cases.
Do you understand, and I realize them over my time, do you understand why the average citizen sitting out there saying, I've got 400 pages of rulemaking, might not understand what they are allowed to do under the law when the director of the ATF can't look at a member of Congress and tell me yes or no, emphatically, whether or not if I sell a weapon or 2 weapons or 3 weapons or 5, whether or not I need a license? Do you think that's the way the law ought to be, or the rules?
Respectfully, I believe that the rule that we have promulgated provides way more information and clarity than
400 pages
than just the 1 or 2 sentences that Congress provided. And we were seeing
and you
massive
can't even answer it. How can the average American know it?
Hi, I've got a quick question about the hiring process.
Okay.
So so say down the road, whenever I decide to apply to the ATF for an internship or something, am I required to not know the Second Amendment, or am I trained to ignore it?
Everyone, as always, any requirements for internships or employment will be listed